By the spring of 1945, the war in Europe was already dying, but history was not finished choosing its heroes. Cities were shattered, armies were exhausted. The enemy was retreating on every front. To most men, victory felt inevitable, but to two generals staring at the same dark river, inevitability was meaningless. What mattered now was something far more dangerous than enemy fire. Who would be remembered when the war was over? The river itself looked ordinary, cold, wide, silent. No monument marked it, no crowd gathered on its banks. Yet it carried a terrible power. Whoever crossed it first would not just move an army forward, they would step into the final paragraph of World War II. And in that paragraph there was only room for one name to be written in bold. One man believed history belonged to preparation, discipline, and an overwhelming force. The other believed history favored nerve, speed, and the courage to move while everyone else hesitated. Both were convinced the world was watching. Both were right. What neither fully understood was that history doesn't wait patiently. It lunges toward whoever dares to grab it. That night the river did not roar. It whispered, and in that whisper was a question that would haunt reputations for generations. Would history reward the man who planned perfectly or the man who moved first? Before we go any further, stories like this, stories about the moments that shaped history and the men who gambled everything, are what you love, subscribe to the channel and support our work. It helps us keep bringing you powerful, unforgettable stories like this one. Now, a quick question for you. When history is written, break A. What matters more? A, perfect planning and discipline. B, bold action at the decisive moment. Comment A or B below, and let's see where you stand before the story unfolds. They wore the same uniforms of victory, saluted the same flags, and fought the same enemy. But beyond that, General Hawk and Field Marshal Sterling lived in entirely different worlds. Hawk believed war was a living thing, unpredictable, violent, ruthless. To him, hesitation was weakness and caution was often just fear dressed up as wisdom. He trusted instinct the way other men trusted doctrine. Decisions were made quickly, sometimes brutally, because Hawk believed that momentum itself could crush an enemy's will long before bullets did. He spoke bluntly, laughed loudly, and carried himself like a man who expected history to keep up with him or get out of the way. Sterling was his mirror opposite. Where Hawk thrived on motion, Sterling thrived on control. He believed war was not chaos to be embraced, but chaos to be mastered. Every operation in his mind was a machine. Each cog carefully measured, every risk minimized. Discipline was not just a tool, it was a moral obligation. To Sterling, lives were saved not by boldness, but by preparation, not by speed, but by certainty. Their conflict was never simply personal, it was philosophical. Hawk saw Sterling as slow, rigid, trapped by his own procedures. An officer fighting yesterday's war with tomorrow's reputation in mind. Sterling saw Hawk as reckless, dangerously theatrical, a man who confused daring with wisdom and headlines with substance. Each believed the other's approach endangered soldiers, even if neither would ever admit it aloud. What bound them together was obsession. Both men wanted the same thing, even if they pretended otherwise. Not promotion, not medals, those were fleeting. What they wanted was permanence. They wanted their names spoken long after the war ended, when memory would simplify events and choose heroes. Hawk chased that immortality through action by doing what no one expected when no one thought it possible. Sterling pursued it through perfection by proving that mastery, not impulse, deserved to define victory. They did not hate each other because they were different. They hated each other because, in some unspoken way, each feared the other might be right. As the war neared its end, that fear sharpened. There was one last great test ahead, one final stage where their beliefs would collide, and both men knew it. Only one question remained unanswered. When the moment came, would history reward the man who moved fastest, or the man who believed he had planned better than anyone who ever lived? Wars are remembered for their victories, but they are shaped by their disappointments. Long before the river became the final prize, a quieter injury had already taken root. one that never appeared on maps or casualty lists. For General Hawk, it began with stillness, not the calm before an attack, but the kind that follows momentum when it is suddenly stolen. His army had been moving fast, faster than anyone thought possible. The enemy was off balance. Victory felt close enough to touch. Then the flow stopped, supplies thinned, orders slowed, opportunities dissolved into waiting. Hawk stood on the edge of what might have been and watched it slip away. To him, that pause was unforgivable. He believed the war demanded urgency, that every hour wasted cost lives that would never be counted. In his mind, the delay was not caution. It was surrender to fear. And as winter dragged on, that belief hardened into something sharper. Resentment. Field Marshal Sterling saw the same moment very differently. To him, restraint was not weakness, but responsibility. He believed a commander's first duty was control of men, of resources, of risk. Pushing too far, too fast invited disaster. History, Sterling believed, was littered with brilliant advances that ended in needless ruin. Neither man was wrong. That was the problem. What Hawk carried forward was not just frustration, but memory. Memory of engines idling while the enemy recovered. Memory of knowing he could strike and being told to wait. That kind of memory does not fade. It festers. By the time the war turned toward its final act, Hawk was no longer willing to trust patience. And the cost of waiting had already been burned into him. The next time opportunity appeared, he promised himself he would not let it pass, no matter the objections, no matter the consequences. In war, wounds of the body heal faster than wounds of pride. And pride, once injured, has a way of deciding the future long before orders are written. While others chase momentum, Field Marshal Sterling chased certainty. To him, the coming river crossing was not merely an operation, it was a declaration of belief. Sterling believed that war, at its highest level, should resemble architecture more than improvisation. Strong foundations, precise measurements, no unnecessary risk. Every detail accounted for before the first stone was laid. For months, his headquarters functioned like a clockwork mechanism. Engineers rehearsed the building of bridges they had not yet touched. Artillery crews memorized firing schedules down to the minute. Air crews flew the same routes again and again until instinct replaced fear. Nothing was accidental, nothing was rushed. Sterling understood the stakes. This crossing would be watched, studied, and judged, not just by allies and enemies, but by history itself. He wanted no surprises, because in his world, surprises were what killed men. There was also something deeply personal woven into the planning. Sterling knew the whispers that followed him, that he was slow, that he was cautious, that he relied too heavily on overwhelming force. This operation was his answer, not with words, but with precision, so absolute it could not be questioned. The date was fixed far in advance. Once chosen, it became sacred. Changing it would suggest doubt, and doubt had no place in Sterling's philosophy. Confidence, he believed, was built through preparation, not impulse. By the time everything was ready, the plan no longer belonged to him alone. It belonged to thousands of men, to allied governments, to a world expecting to witness professionalism at its finest. Sterling was calm, almost serene. He trusted his system completely. What he did not account for was that certainty, when made visible, creates an opening. For someone who believes speed can outrun perfection. Deadlines in war do not arrive as numbers on a calendar. They arrive as pressure, quiet at first, then unbearable. When General Hawk received authorization to move, it came without celebration and without comfort. There was no promise of support on his schedule, no guarantee of priority. What he saw immediately was the clock. He knew exactly how much time remained before Field Marshal Sterling's grand operation would unfold in full view of the world. Once that happened, any success Hawk achieved would be secondary, footnoted, overshadowed. For most commanders, this would have been reason to wait, to align with the larger plan, to avoid risk. Hawk felt the opposite. To wait was to vanish. He understood something instinctively. History does not measure effort. It measures timing. Being right too late often looks identical to being wrong. Hawk had lived through that lesson once already, and he refused to repeat it. The deadline transformed every decision. Orders were compressed. Movements accelerated. Equipment that would normally require weeks to position was pushed forward in days. Staff officers argued logistics. Hawk listened, then cut through the noise. He was not reckless. He was decisive. In his mind, there was a difference. Sleep became optional. Doubt became dangerous. Hawk's confidence was not loud in those hours. It was focused. He believed that speed itself could become protection, that acting before the enemy and before his rival would strip both of the ability to respond. The irony was cruel. Sterling's months of careful preparation, visible to everyone, created the very pressure Hawk needed. The certainty of one man became the catalyst for another. Deadlines do not just shape plans, they reveal character. And in those compressed days, General Hawk became exactly the man he believed history required him to be. There was no speech that night, no dramatic countdown, no thunder of artillery to announce that history was about to shift. General Hawk wanted silence, not just tactical silence, but symbolic silence. He wanted the crossing to exist for hours before the world even knew it had happened. In his mind, surprise was not merely a military advantage. It was a form of truth. If the enemy did not expect him, neither would history. The river lay black and still, reflecting nothing. Soldiers moved carefully, hands steady, breath controlled. Oars were wrapped, metal was muffled. Orders traveled in whispers so soft they seemed swallowed by the water. Every man understood the stakes without being told. If the river erupted in noise, the gamble would collapse instantly. On the far bank, the enemy was unprepared, not because they were weak, but because they were human. They faced the wrong direction. They trusted the calendar. They believed the next great crossing would come with warning. It did not. When the first boats touched the eastern shore, resistance was confused and brief. What little fighting occurred ended quickly, swallowed by darkness and disbelief. By the time dawn began to thin the night, entire units were across. Engineers worked feverishly, transforming fragile success into permanence. Losses were astonishingly light, not because the river was easy, but because timing had been perfect. For Hawk, this was the moment he had waited for, not the victory itself, but the proof that speed could defeat preparation, proof that daring, when calculated, could save lives rather than waste them. Most of all, proof that while others waited for permission from history, he had crossed into it quietly, without asking to be seen. And that made all the difference. The crossing was complete, but for General Hawk, the operation was only half finished. Battles could be won in silence. History could not. As dawn crept across the riverbanks and engineers worked to turn fragile bridges into permanent ones, Hawk stood apart from the noise of progress and reached for a field telephone. This call was not about orders or reports. It was about ownership. He understood something many commanders never fully grasped. If you do not tell your story first, someone else will tell it for you, and they will not be generous. His words were sharp, urgent, unmistakable. The message was simple: we are across. But beneath that simplicity was intent. Hawk was not asking for acknowledgement. He was demanding that the world be informed before the moment could be diluted, delayed, or buried beneath someone else's spectacle. Those on the other end understood immediately. This was not routine communication. This was a race for memory. Within hours, the machinery of modern war turned its attention outward. Press officers moved, reporters listened, headlines began to take shape before the day was half over. The language mattered. No massive bombardment, no airborne assault, no weeks of preparation. Just speed, silence, and success. By the time Field Marshal Sterling's operation began in full view of the world, the narrative had already been set. The contrast was unavoidable. One crossing felt daring. The other, though flawless, felt expected. Hawk knew exactly what he was doing. This was not arrogance. It was strategy adapted to a new battlefield, one made of ink, radio waves, and public imagination. In this arena, timing mattered as much as troop movements. That single phone call ensured that when people spoke about the river, they would speak his name first. In war, victory decides outcomes, but stories decide legacy. And with a few carefully chosen words, General Hawk claimed the spotlight before anyone else could step into it. Field Marshal Sterling did not respond. That silence, to those who understood him, spoke louder than any rebuttal ever could. As reports reached his headquarters confirming General Hawk's crossing and then the headlines that followed, Sterling showed no visible reaction. Orders continued to flow, schedules were maintained, maps were studied with the same precision as always. To the men around him, he appeared unchanged, professional, controlled, untouchable. But restraint was not indifference. Sterling believed deeply in the idea that a commander's conduct mattered as much as his results. Public outrage, accusations, or counterclaims would have betrayed the very principles he had built his career upon. War, in his view, demanded dignity, even when dignity came at a personal cost. Privately, the insult cut deep. This was supposed to be the moment that justified everything he stood for. Months of planning, years of discipline, a lifetime spent proving that careful preparation saved lives and won wars. Instead, the world seemed captivated by speed and spectacle. Sterling understood the injustice of it with painful clarity. Yet he also understood his responsibility. Thousands of soldiers were already moving under his command. Their safety depended on focus, not resentment. Whatever anger he felt had to be locked away, unseen and unspoken. There was also something more difficult to confront, a quiet recognition that Hawk's success was real. The crossing had worked, losses were minimal, the gamble had paid off. Admitting that, even privately, made the silence heavier. Sterling chose restraint not because he was weak, but because he believed leadership demanded it. History would judge his operation by results, not noise. That belief sustained him. Still, as the radio crackled and the papers spread across tables, one truth remained painfully clear. In a world that rewards boldness, silence can feel like defeat, even when you are winning. Field Marshal Sterling's operation unfolded exactly as it was designed to. There were no surprises, no breakdowns, and no moments of panic. Artillery fire followed its schedule with mechanical precision. Air assaults landed where they were meant to land. Engineers raised bridges on time, under control, as if rehearsing a familiar routine rather than forcing a passage through one of the enemy's last great natural defenses. From a professional standpoint, it was flawless. Enemy resistance collapsed in sectors that had been studied for months. Casualties, though inevitable, were within expectations. The road forward opened wide, just as Sterling had promised it would. Any military academy would have recognized the operation as a model of modern warfare executed at its highest level, and yet the world barely paused. By the time the final phase was underway, the narrative had already shifted elsewhere. Headlines spoke of daring, of silence, of a crossing achieved without spectacle, because that story was easier to tell. Sterling's success, built on systems rather than surprise, lacked drama. It was competence without controversy, mastery without shock. For Sterling, this was the quiet cruelty of excellence. He had done everything right. He had protected his men. He had broken the enemy. But history, it seemed, had little patience for perfection that arrived second. There was no bitterness in his orders, no visible frustration in his conduct. Still, beneath the calm exterior, a hard truth settled in. The world did not reward the most careful hand. It rewarded the most memorable moment. Sterling understood then that legacy was not always shaped by results alone. It was shaped by timing, by contrast, by the stories people wanted to believe. His operation would endure in records and reports, but not in imagination. And for a man who believed deeply in professionalism, that realization cut deeper than any criticism ever could. When the war finally moved beyond the river and into its closing days, the rivalry between General Hawk and Field Marshal Sterling did not end with a handshake or reconciliation. It faded into history the way most great tensions do, not resolved but absorbed by time. Both men had succeeded. That truth was undeniable. Hawk's daring crossing proved that speed and audacity could shatter an exhausted enemy. Sterling's operation demonstrated that preparation and overwhelming coordination could secure victory on a scale no single gamble ever could. Together, their actions accelerated the end of the war and spared countless lives that would have been lost to delay. Yet history would not remember them equally. Hawk's name became attached to a moment, a night of silence, a decision made against expectation, a story that traveled faster than facts. Sterling's name became associated with professionalism, discipline, and correctness. Both deserved respect. Only one inspired legend. This is the uncomfortable reality of how legacy is formed. Manuals preserve knowledge, moments create memory. One teaches future generations how to act, the other teaches them what to admire. Sterling understood this, even if he never accepted it. Hawke understood it instinctively, even if he never articulated it. That difference defined them as much as any battle plan or command style ever did. For those who look back from the safety of peace, the lesson is not about choosing one man over the other. It is about recognizing the tension between excellence and recognition, between doing things right and being seen at the right time. History rarely asks who was most prepared. It asks who stepped forward when the moment demanded a decision. And in that final reckoning, legacy belongs not to the thickest manual, but to the moment that refuses to be forgotten. In the end, this was never just a story about a river, a rivalry, or even a war. It was a story about how human ambition behaves when victory is already within reach. General Hawke and Field Marshal Sterling were both exceptional leaders. One trusted momentum, instinct, and decisive action. The other trusted discipline, structure, and preparation refined over time. Each believed deeply that his way was not only effective but right, and history proved something uncomfortable. Both of them were correct. Hawke's bold crossing showed that speed, surprise, and courage can collapse resistance and change the course of events in a single night. Sterling's meticulous operation showed that planning, coordination, and professionalism can deliver victory with stability and scale. Together, their actions shortened the war and saved lives, but history, as it so often does, remembered them differently. Why? Because history does not remember effort, it remembers moments. This is where the lesson reaches beyond the battlefield and into our own lives. In careers, relationships, and personal goals, many people do everything right. They prepare, they wait, they refine, and sometimes they still arrive second. Others move when the moment appears, imperfectly, boldly, and visibly, and claim the story. The lesson is not to abandon preparation, nor to worship recklessness. The lesson is balance. Preparation gives you the right to act. Courage gives you the power to be remembered. When opportunity appears, hesitation can quietly erase years of hard work. So here's a question for you. What matters more in shaping a meaningful legacy? A. Careful preparation and discipline. B. Bold action at the decisive moment. Comment A or B below. And beyond that, what do you think? Have you seen moments in life where timing mattered more than perfection? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments so others can learn from them too. If you value stories that connect history to real life, subscribe to the channel and support us. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating powerful stories like this. Stories that don't just inform, but stay with you long after the video ends.